been raining all day. Look at that beautifulness. What do you do at police week when it's pouring outside and you can't go anywhere? Make a video. Now, I've had a lot of requests about how do you fly armed, and kind of piggybacking on that, how do you transport a firearm? Now, obviously those are two separate things, and I'll attack both of those in two separate points in this video. Bottom line is, both of them are actually relatively easy, and transporting a firearm is just as easy as checking a bag of luggage, which we all know how to do that. So transporting a bag with a firearm in it. I've done this several times, and I think even at my own agency, officers suffer from the idea that you're going to get overly harassed, or that you're going to break some law by trying to fly with a gun. It's actually extremely common, and as long as you declare it, and as long as you follow the correct procedure within your bag of transporting it, you don't get hassled. So the first part, you have a destination you want to go to, and you want to take your firearm. Very first thing you should do is pack your luggage as you normally would. So you'll have to check your bag. You'll have to have a checked bag. So firearms luckily are small enough to where you can just throw it in a bag you were already going to check. Now, the TSA requires that your firearm be in a locked, hard surfaced container. I would recommend just following what they suggest. So to be clear, that container doesn't just have to shut and secure. It actually has to have a lock. And they go as far as to say, although I've never had this checked, but maybe one time, you have to have the key on you for the lock, or the combination with you for the lock, in case they ask to see the weapon. But first things first, got to check a bag, got to put it in a hard case. The weapon cannot be loaded. So loaded means something different to every single one of us, even police officers. Loaded means something different. According to the TSA, loaded means round in the chamber, or rounds in a magazine that are inserted into the firearm. So even though you don't have one in the chamber, even though it's not charged, it is still considered loaded if the magazine is seated into the firearm. You have to transport ammunition and weapons separately, and the amount of ammunition you have has to be reasonable. This is probably where the majority of you that will have an issue or a comment about being harassed or whatever while flying, this is probably the topic that you're going to talk about, because we all go to trainings where you have to have 500, 1,000, 2,000 rounds of ammunition. How in the world do you fly there and justify the 2,000 rounds of ammunition? I'll give you a couple tips for that. So you know you're going to fly with your firearm. You have it unloaded. You put it in a hard, locked box in your checked bag. You have your ammo separate from that in the same checked bag. Now you deal with the TSA. And when you transport a firearm, it is not that hard.
That's what she said.
Now you have to declare your firearm. Now this is where we introduce the human element into flying with a firearm. The TSA agent may want to see the firearm. They may want to see that it's unloaded. They may want to check the status of your hard case. And I'm telling you, if you have a hard case and it's easily opened, even though it's locked, they're not going to let you fly. So just go buy the stupid padlock, or buy a combo lock, or have a good lock already on the hard case, and avoid all of that issue to begin with. Once you're at the airport with your checked bag and you've declared to the TSA agent, life should be pretty smooth sailing at that point. My experience, I don't know if it's just my airport or not, they'll put a additional tag inside the luggage. It's traditionally, I think, an orange tag that you fill out, and they'll put it inside the luggage. So there's nothing on the outside of your luggage that says, hey, there's a firearm in here. So if any of you are worried about that, it doesn't happen. Some tips of issues that you might run into. So say you have to take a substantial amount of ammunition with you, and that's in an additional check bag, or in the check bag with your clothes and all that. If they ask you about the reasonable amount of ammo, there's not really a definition of reasonable. Probably you and I can say that if I'm taking my 9mm firearm with me on vacation, a reasonable amount of ammunition. I'm not going to be target practicing. I'm not going to be out shooting anything that I know of unless an emergency exists. So a reasonable amount of ammunition for me just traveling with my firearm is a couple magazines. And the TSA agrees with that. I've never been really asked on that. I have taken substantial amounts of ammunition with me for training. One way to help you, and I'm not saying this works. If they tell you you're a no-go on the flight, you're a no-go on the flight. Or you may want to call them prior. One thing that may help with you flying with more ammunition than what may seem reasonable to somebody objectively looking at it, just get something from your agency vetting you flying with that amount of ammunition. So Maybe an agency administrator could write a letter stating this officer is flying on this date to go to this training, and the training requires this amount of ammunition, which is why it is checked in his luggage. That tends to help a ton, and it gives them something objective to look at, that they can vet, that they can call, that they can confirm. It's not just this random person's word showing up in an airport. So that does help if you are carrying more ammunition than what looks reasonable. The best practice would probably be to give the airline a heads up, call them and say, I'm going to be flying with about 1,500 rounds. Obviously, I'll follow all the protocol, won't be with the firearm, won't be loaded in the firearm. What would you like me to do? What do you need from me in order to fly with this weapon? Now, keep in mind, that's TSA. Airlines also have rules on top of what the TSA says for how they want you to transport a firearm. This can present problems because some of the rules are more based on hype than they are efficiency at all. For example, Delta requires you to carry your firearm in a manufacturer's case only, which can present a problem if you don't have the manufacturer's case anymore. That I don't understand. They do have weight limits on firearms and ammunition, which I do understand because they obviously have a profit margin they need to take care of, and more weight means more fuel, and they want to minimize that. So I have no issue with that, but whatever, it's their rodeo. So that's why I suggest call the airline prior to your flight and see if they have any extra gimmicky, whatever, rules on top of what the TSA suggests. So that's the general gist of transporting a firearm. And even with all that being said, I don't know how long that segment came out to be. Transporting your firearm on a plane in checked luggage is just like flying with checked luggage. I've not experienced any delays or any significant delays in transporting my firearm with me on a flight. Carrying your firearm on a flight is a whole different ballgame, and I mean it when I say it. You cannot do that. They will not allow you to do that unless you're on official police business. That does not include going to training. That does not include going somewhere where you will eventually have to arrest a suspect. That does not mean going somewhere on an investigation. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means you have to be operating within your official police capacity as determined by your department. So as a general rule of thumb, there has to be a need for you to have the firearm on the flight. I've heard a lot of rumors about, oh, I have training, so I had my firearm. Those people may have gotten away with it. I don't know. I'm obviously not a fly on the wall for all of those little interactions with TSA. Maybe they got away with it, but I can tell you there are a lot more cases where people didn't get away with it, and even some people got fined for even trying to get away with it. So flying armed, you absolutely have to be on police business, and on top of that, you have to have the need for the firearm being on your person on that flight. Really, the most common theme that officers run into when they need to have their firearm on a flight is transporting a prisoner. So they're taking a prisoner down to a facility, and maybe they're bringing a prisoner back, or they're transporting a prisoner for some legal process in another state, and they're bringing the prisoner back. So they have that prisoner with them and they need it immediately. Or a protective detail, and you'll be sitting with your dignitary or your protected party, and you have to have that firearm with you as a law enforcement officer to protect that party throughout the duration of the flight. So that would be a valid reason. All of that, though, has to be backed up by your agency prior to the flight, stating that you are there on official police business. And again, this is directed at municipal police officers, city police officers, county sheriff's deputies, major metropolitan police officers, things like that. I understand that there are air marshals. I understand that there are special agents. I understand that there are all these other individuals within the federal government and whatnot that routinely fly. I'm talking about your regular run-of-the-mill police officers, detectives, whatever, flying armed. So first things first, I said I would run down the process for that, so here it is. You have to be a full-time police officer. You have to be a sworn police officer. You have to be authorized by your agency to be carrying the weapon on the flight. And the cherry on top, you have to complete the TSA's law enforcement, I think it's called the Law Enforcement Officer Flying Armed program. It's a real basic, easy training course that doesn't require a whole lot of knowledge upstairs. I think it's more of a formality for them, but those things are definitely required to fly armed. But out of that, the absolute most important thing that you need to fly armed is a reason to be flying armed. The TSA calls that reasoning an operational need. That comes from the department. That's determined by your home agency. that is forwarded by your home agency on letterhead to the TSA. Now, even though it is determined by your department and not by the TSA can still govern and analyze that reasoning, and they want the reasoning to be based on these factors. Like I said before, assigned to a protective detail in some capacity where you absolutely have to have that firearm with you to be able to enact that protection on the protected party. If you're conducting, I think they call it a hazardous surveillance operation. I've never heard of that, or let me say I've never seen a real life example of that. I do know they exist, but probably in very, very specific circumstances. But that would be a very, very in-depth investigation where you're actually buying tickets of the suspect or of the target or of the person with the involved airline to follow them. So that is pretty intense. About the closest thing that we could utilize as far as saying, hey, I'm on training, so I need my gun with me on the plane, is you are going to a destination where you would have to have that firearm with you immediately to report for duty upon landing. There are some real world scenarios that I actually know of where that would happen. So say you are going to another city or maybe another state for a protective detail for a presidential visit or for a dignitary visit. And as soon as you get wheels down, you have to exit that plane, get on a transport vehicle, and go to your outpost or go to your command post, wherever you're going. You wouldn't have time to go to checked luggage. So in that circumstance, you would have an operational need to have your firearm with you and immediately deploy off the plane to wherever you're going. The easiest one is control of a prisoner. That's also the most common one. So we'll go deliver a prisoner for some legal process in another state as soon as we're done with him or her, bring them back on the flight. That obviously would require a firearm. That's a legitimate and common law enforcement need. And like I said before, the feds have their own guidelines and procedures, whether they're officially on duty or off duty, as long as they're falling within their procedures and guidelines. A lot of the federal law enforcement agents fly armed within their own policy. Once you have all of that done, you have your authorization from your agency, you've had the training online, you're certified, or at least you've passed the training. Now you must notify at least 24 hours prior to your flight NLETs, or National Law Enforcement Officers Telecommunication System. Sorry, I had to think about that one. You must notify through an official message on NLETs at least 24 hours prior to your flight that you are flying armed. Keep in mind, flying armed, if you have 3 layovers, it's not like a checked firearm that you're just transporting, because that checked firearm just kind of goes right through without you seeing it again. A lot of times the TSA will have you personally check in at each airport where you're going to be interacting in those gates armed and changing planes armed, because you're going to be on different airlines. A lot of times the TSA might have you recheck. So that's why it's important to follow the protocol on that training program. They're most likely going to have you check in with your airline, because the airlines are going to want to know there's an armed passenger on each of their flights as well. So a lot of that flying armed has to do with you taking the initiative on each step of those flights. All right, that's it for this video. I know this isn't going to reach like a broad spectrum of my subscribers. It's only going to hit like a little niche, but a lot of you have asked for answers to this question. So I thought, it's raining out, can't do much outside right now. Might as well get this answer, get a video out and upload it so you guys have some knowledge base of how to fly armed, and or most likely, more commonly, transporting your firearm while you fly. I appreciate all the comments, appreciate all the messages, appreciate all the emails, appreciate all the DMs. You guys have been great. Can't wait to bring you more content, and I'll see you next time.